This video is about stitching a visor to a bag to make a hood for a powered air purifying respirator. I'm going to use doubled up thread just because twice as much security for the same amount of work. If you're sewing through very heavy plastic like a 2-liter bottle, I recommend making the holes first with a hot needle. But this material I can go through. I'm using a thin, very thin visor. Which would be similar to transparency paper. I'm going to try to stagger the holes just a little bit to make this. Could stagger the holes to make it a little bit more durable. I'm going to actually try to make this go quickly, so instead I'm just going to try to sew before this comes apart. Struggling with this, I'm actually thinking that it could possibly have been wise to try trimming this bag first before working with it. Towel that I'm using to avoid scratching the inside of the visor, slipping up. I'm going to try folding some of the excess of this bag over just to have an easier time sewing. Looks like I might have already managed to get this tangled up. It's amazing how thread just seems to form knots. Entire series of mathematics dedicated to the theory of knots. Oh, and this also is, looks like my initial seams are not quite as tight as I would like them to be. Okay, and that was try not to actually sew yourself. Very easy. Poke a hole in skin with that needle. So I'm gonna keep one hand to hold the thread tight while I use the other to put the needle through. All right. While sewing, you don't want the thread that you already sewed to become loose. That's what was just happening there. All right. And I'll keep. See, right now this camera doesn't have a very good view of what I'm doing. See if I can change that without tangling up the thread. And this will probably take more time than I can record on this camera. I have a limited amount of memory. This is, you probably find lots and lots of videos online about how to sew. And that's all that I'm doing. The big thing is, as I sew, trying to avoid tangles. And you can't see this on camera, but I'm straightening out the thread between each pass to reduce the sort of tangles that you just saw me straighten out. I'm trying to make a stitch about every, say about 5 millimeters is my spacing. Once you make, oh, now I'm having a tough time. Bring this through. If you decide you want a finer stitching, you can always go back after you've made an initial stitch, because the initial stitch will hold the plastic in place. Again, between each pass, try to straighten out the thread if you're using a double thread like I am. And try to avoid tangles. I will probably go over this with a layer of glue once the stitching is all done. Yet small holes in this type of mask are okay because the air on the inside of the mask is at a higher pressure than the air outside. So a little bit of leaking is fine because the filtered air on the inside will leak out instead of having the unfiltered air leak in. This cord is really quite determined to tangle, so I'm just doing my best to avoid that. far, so good. I think that's a little more than 5 millimeters. That looks like that's just about, probably closer to 10 millimeters or a whole centimeter. So I'll try to be more patient. And even though I'm sewing in a straight line, something you might want to consider, especially if you're making larger holes, is to kind of stagger them so that they're not along a straight line, because that could make it easier for the material to grip. But I'm placing them small enough, far enough apart relative to the thickness of this needle. I think I will be fine. I'm not expecting this to tear along those holes. I'm just going to repeat this process going all the way around. As I'm going, try to make sure that the mask is staying in line with how it was taped. You want to have some idea of how many times you have to sew. You can just divide the distance around the area that you're stitching and divide that by the distance of each stitch. So it looks to me like this is probably about easily maybe 300 or 400 millimeters around, and at 3 to 5 millimeters at a time, I can expect to make about 100 stitches. And it can also help to mark in advance where you're planning to stitch, because that can avoid the problem that you see happening with me, where a little bit of impatience is causing me to make some stitches that are farther apart than I had intended. This one and that one. That one's closer to my target of 3 or 4 millimeters. And as I stitch, I'm trying to also maintain the curvature between the plastics, 2 layers of plastic as I go around. Though this bag might actually have enough flexibility so that it will accommodate some imperfections in the curvature. So I am maybe 1/10 of the way around. So maybe 100 minutes, assuming that I get more practice and a little bit quicker as I go. So consider probably about 2 hours of time to stitch your hood, more or less, depending on exactly the methods that you use. If you have a sewing machine, that could help a lot. This hole's a little larger or farther apart than intended, but since I already made the hole, I'm going with that. I keep doing this a lot. It was certainly toughened the skin on my fingers some. I think I will stop this at around 20 minutes. As I said, the camera will eventually stop itself anyway from having a limited amount of memory. What you can kind of do is just multiply the time by how much farther I need to go around. So it looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Hoping I haven't spent the entire, I don't think I've spent the entire 20 minutes of this video sewing. I will be optimistic and say I've only really been sewing for 10 minutes, which would mean I have about 70 minutes to go, so a little bit more than an hour. I'll make another video when I'm done so that I have some idea of exactly how long it took. Computer, what time is it?
The time is 2:58 p.m.
So it's 2:58 p.m. right now. I'll make another video when I'm done with this, so we'll have some idea of how long it actually took.